Okie doke. Good day, let's say. Morning for some people, afternoon for others. Very early in the morning for our presenter, Jennifer Dorling, who we're very pleased to have presenting to us from Brisbane in Australia. So it's very, very late. We're very thankful that she has given up her Friday evening for our enjoyment of her talk. Jennifer's talk is going to be on mental toughness in sports people. Just before she starts, a few mentions of various administrative things in terms of conferences, deadlines and dates and so on. Today is the submission deadline if you're interested in the the 11th Math Sport Conference, which will take place in Luxembourg. And that takes place when is it? It's in June the 4th to the 6th in Luxembourg, but the submission deadline is today if you want to submit a paper for that conference. The 19th Gijón Sports Economics Conference has been announced this week. That will be on the 9th and 10th of May in Gijón. And the deadline for abstracts is going to be the 1st of April. So do be aware of that. Final thing I will flag up, as I've been flagging up in this forum for a little while now. I am organising a conference with Oldham Athletic, which is it's in the stand that's literally behind me in my background. It's up at a football stadium in the north of England. If you're interested in that, please do sign up. There, I will put some information in the chat. There's information in the reminder that you had, there's also a Roses WhatsApp group if you want to join that to keep up to date with what's going on in the series. Jennifer has an hour in which to speak, and then there's plenty of time for Q&A afterwards. She's quite happy to take questions as she goes along, so if you do have a question, raise your hand. And without any further delays, Jennifer, please do take away your talk on mental toughness in sports people.
Thank you very much, and thanks for introducing me as well. And thank you everybody for dialing in to this very interesting topic. What I want to talk about today is mental toughness in sports people. I will just bring up my presentation. And you just let me know when you can see. Okay.
Yeah, I can see that.
Can you see the screen, or can you see what's at the bottom as well?
Just see your slideshow. So at the bottom I can see slide 1 of 41.
Okay, perfect. Okay. So I think I have the control then over the pack. Amazing. Okay. So before I get started with the topic overall, I just give a little bit of a background and introduction about myself. So my name is Jennifer Dorling, as you know. I'm a PhD student in my hopefully last year in psychology. I live in Brisbane in Queensland in Australia. I'm an Australian citizen as well. My background, what you might can hear from my accent, is European. So I'm half German, half British. My dad's actually from England. He's half Scottish, and my mom's from Germany. I was raised in both countries, and then moved to Australia, and now studying here in this beautiful part of the world, on the Gold Coast in Queensland, on the beach, which is great, and at a very good university, at Bond University. And so I'm also I'm now working for the Queensland government in a corporate role as an organizational change manager for a big program. But my focus was always psychology, and my big passion is psychology. And I'm an athlete on the side as well. So I do mixed martial arts, which probably nobody would guess. And I'm competing as well, and I particularly focus on Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So because of my background in the sport and because of my passion in psychology, that's a really good fit, obviously, for mental toughness. So that's kind of how it arose. The topic itself sits in positive psychology. So there's obviously the whole range of psychology, and there's this big concept of positive psychology. So I'm focusing on that, not clinical psychology, which is just not my sort of interest, but positive psychology is definitely very much. And I believe that there's a lot of potential in there, how we can focus on what people actually need and not only what they're diagnosed with, but we need to ask ourselves the question, what good is out there, and not only focusing on the bad. So when mental toughness, for example, comes in, we want to think about what is mentally, what we can do better, what we can make better, what's actually good in our lives, what is actually good in the things we're doing. So athletes are obviously a very, very great area to do research on when it comes to mental toughness, especially the sports area. It hasn't been particularly done in a broader sense out of sport. So I'm doing a bit of work on the organizational side as well, but also with people or organizations that have great exposure to stress or are under a lot of stress, under a lot of pressures. For example, if you think of emergency responders, maybe firefighters, maybe in hospitals. Construction is also an industry we're focusing on a little bit, just any high-performing organizations. So that's kind of where the topic is placed, and that's just a little bit of context just before we get started. So I want to start with a quote: "The will to prepare has to be greater than the will to win." Bobby Knight, you probably know him as well. It's a great quote, and I wanted to integrate that in this presentation. This presentation is, by the way, one I presented last year in Innsbruck in the European Conference on Positive Psychology, where I flew over and presented. I was a speaker there and presented exactly this research. So it hasn't been published in an academic journal or anything yet, but it's on ResearchGate, and I think it's out there, but it was only held once before this. So I want to speak a bit about positive psychology, as I said, the hero model, where my research surrounds or like is kind of placed in psychological capital. A little bit about mental toughness, what it is, then the gap in PsyCap with mental toughness, expanding the conceptual domain of mental toughness, results in key findings we found in our analysis, and then a new instrument which I want to introduce. So there is an historic issue with the resilience definition overall since the early 2000s. It was kind of loosely defined. When we speak about mental toughness, everybody obviously thinks about resilience. So the evolution, how resilience definitions occurred over time, were very broad. What we found in the research was that there's not really a great definition around it. There's a lack of a comprehensive framework, and a lot of interpretations are there. And there is a need for a clearer conceptual boundary needed, or plural boundaries. and a whole definition around that, not only the concept, but the word itself. There is also a gap in the PsyCap resilience. I will explain what PsyCap is in a second. That leads to more gaps in the clarity of interpretation and ambiguity, and there's a clear need to find a proper explanation for that. So what we can see is there's a lack of a whole comprehensive framework, a structure that hinders our research to find actually clarity. We can't really find effective application because there are so many definitions and explanations out there, and we need an enhanced understanding. Some theoretical frameworks around key psychological models related to mental toughness are on here on this slide. So the most common one is probably known as the 4C model, which is the second one on here. This was developed and has 4 key components: control, commitment, challenge, and confidence. So probably most of you know that one. Then there's the integrated model, then there's the personal construct theory, and there's another framework, which is the interplay between self-belief, emotional control, and perseverance to consistently perform under pressure. So as you can see, there a lot of researchers have done a lot of work on theory, on theoretical frameworks, but a whole one explanation is just not out there. So it's just fragmented. A whole understanding is, yeah, just all over. As I mentioned earlier, I just want to give a quick introduction to PsyCap and where that comes in. So PsyCap is a concept that was developed around, I think, 15 to 20 years ago only. It's quite a niche area in positive psychology. It has 4 components, which they call the hero components. They are H stands for hope, E stands for efficacy or self-efficacy, R stands for resilience, and then the O is for optimism in the hero model. So everything builds the hero model, which makes a lot of sense because those concepts or domains in PsyCap then build the whole sort of construct overall. It is a defined positive state. It is an individual's positive psychological state, and that was defined by Luthens and his colleagues in 2007. So there we go. There we have the number 2007. There's a lot of research on that one in positive psychology. However, I'm one of the researchers globally who's doing research on it overall. It has great potential to be implemented in a broader scope. For example, I always put up the example, imagine there are 2 people working in an organization, or let's say two great athletes. One of them has low scores on all those dimensions. Let's say not really hopeful, doesn't have great resilience, is not very optimistic, and so on. There's another athlete, very successful, believes in himself or herself, has a great perspective on the world, has a lot of belief in the future, has a high score on optimism, for example, is very resilient, very mentally tough in that sense, and knows his or her capabilities. So that person scores really highly on psychological capital. So now we compare those 2 people, and one, even though they have the same talent, and are very, very high-performing athletes, the one who has the better mindset wins more, is more successful, thrives more, and gets all the successes, where the other one might have the talent, might have everything that should be there for an successful athlete, but just can't overcome certain things. Now, if we implement interventions, what we can do with psychological capital, so you can improve on those dimensions, imagine what that athlete with so much potential can achieve. So then we compare that again to the other one who's already on those higher levels. We include those interventions, train the other one basically on those dimensions, and then that athlete gets even better than the other one. So you can still improve on all dimensions, so they can be high or low, and you can test them and do a lot of work, a lot of mental work, obviously, to improve us on those dimensions, and then body and mind work together, and you can achieve great things. So that's psychological capital. The importance in organizational settings, as I mentioned before, or I touched on it a little bit, we also explore this in an organizational setting or in organizational context. In some companies, we did some research, and mostly there were high-performing organizations, for example, like global organizations, professional organizations. It contributes to employee well-being. It enhances employees' mental well-being. It fosters a positive psychological state. There's less turnover. There's a lot of research on that as well. It boosts job satisfaction. People are happier in their jobs. They have a greater work ethic, higher employee morale as well. And it improves overall organizational performance. So there was a lot of research done to test the organizational behavior, and the organizational performance improved through enhanced psychological capital. So that's then called organizational psychological capital. Since we have a gap in this resilience and the whole definition of it, and where does it actually fit in, we looked at mental toughness. Just because of the reason that we thought, if there's resilience in psychological capital, and if mental toughness is also included in positive psychology, why isn't it included in psychological capital in the concept at all, but only resilience? So is there maybe a moderator for psychological capital? We were also looking to fill the gap in resilience with mental toughness. So that addresses the loose definition of resilience by offering a more structured approach. There's an improved coping understanding that mental toughness enhances the comprehension of coping mechanisms, for example. There's a complementary nature, that it's complementing the existing components of PsyCap, and strengthened emotional regulation, that it enhances emotional regulation and the effective responses to, for example, stress. A quick definition on mental toughness at this stage. So it has a lot of similarity to resilience. It resembles resilience. However, it structures a more methodological approach and a coping mechanism effectively. And then it's complementary to PsyCap. we did a research, and this is probably more the interesting part, more the practical part on this. We did a research study on team sports and on individual sports. We did one hand on rugby players. So in Australia, there's AFL and like different rugby areas, I would say. You maybe be aware of those. So we looked at the Australian rugby players and then at mixed martial artists as well. And because one was team sports, one was individual sports, how do they compare to each other? A bit of demographics here. So the mean age of rugby players was 21, MMA athletes was 26, mean years of education 10.5 versus 11.45. Both were male. There are unfortunately not many females in both of the sports, but that's okay. We are looking at some others at the moment with our third study, which is a bit of a different one, but we will have more genders in there, and mostly Australian, a bit of European background as well. So we were looking at what does it contribute to in terms of the whole research. We were assuming there would be a key success factor in sports overall with mental toughness. It's been a long-standing discussion in sports literature. As I said at the beginning, it's not really being applied to broader teams, for example, sports teams, or even like looking at one individual. A little bit, yes, but also not in an organizational space, for example. There are transferable traits to organizational settings, therefore. And we have found there are a lot of high performing levels with maintaining mental toughness. The perceived benefits of mental toughness is enhanced performance, stress management improvements, and impact of low mental toughness levels. So if somebody has low mental toughness, we want to improve them. And then it goes again to the other side to enhance performance and stress management, for example. We also wanted to develop a new instrument to measure mental toughness, which is the next step of the whole research. We found that there are a lot of contaminated instruments, inadequate capture. So when I say contaminated instruments, existing measures, that might be influenced by researchers' biases, because if we tell somebody what we want them to do, it's not really what the answers will not really be what they would provide us if we didn't tell them what we wanted out of it. So that could happen. So we wanted to develop an instrument that measures adequately what we were actually looking for without contaminating anything. What we did in the research was using the repertory grid, which I'm not sure if anybody heard of that yet. It was introduced by Kelly first in 1960. So that hinders any contamination from a researcher, and that hinders researchers' bias as well. That was used to capture participants' personal constructs of mental toughness that ensure the perspectives were actually reflected without any bias at all. So what we asked participants to do was to compare and contrast the elements of mental toughness. So basically what they think mental toughness would be. On the left-hand side with P1 and P2, we asked them, for example, think about person 1 who's mentally tough, person 2 who's mentally tough, and then compare them on the Likert scale from 1 to 5, with 5 being the mentally strongest and one mentally weakest. On the right-hand side, with person 3, you put in initials of someone you think they are very similar to those mentally tough people, and why are they not mentally tough? Put in one word, and also score them on the strength of the construct from 1 to 5. So rate them, for example, with not mentally tough, and then score them on 5, for example, if you think they are not mentally tough. Then after we've done all that with the rugby team and the MMA athletes, we asked them to fill that all in. It was all anonymous, obviously. We analyzed the data in SPSS, a statistics program, and used multidimensional scaling to identify the key themes and some clusters. I just explained what the repertory grid is, so I'm not really touching on that one. I hope everybody can see that here, but that's probably a great example of our results. What we saw here was on the left-hand side, you can see the individual athletes. We did some cluster analysis, and the significant clusters we analyzed, we identified, for example, perseverance was really important to them, self-belief and discipline. Key themes we identified was they focused a lot on personal discipline, psychological resilience. It is obviously an individual sport, so they were really, really concerned about their own performance and pushing themselves and being really self-disciplined, being motivated, and that really stood out. On the other hand, with the rugby players, what they thought mental toughness is, that it related a lot of teamwork and having a leader and having good leadership in place for the team, and more focusing on the collective resilience, which was really interesting. Key themes we identified was the emphasis on team cohesion, on collaborative strength, and everything was more around the team mindset and team strength of them all. Whereas again, the individual athletes were maybe even a bit selfish in that sense, really focused on themselves and not really looking around or after others, but had really, really, really great results in, for example, discipline and and self-belief around those topics. From those results, we identified emerging themes. So that was the whole study 1 we've done. And we identified 6 new domains of mental toughness from that research. So we spent quite a lot of time to conduct this research with the repertory grids that I showed earlier. And those were our results. Now, especially, they scored high on discipline, or that was a domain that stood out quite significantly. We had perseverance, motivation, self-belief, tenacity, and leadership. So those were the main themes, or like new 6 domains of mental toughness we found in that study. From that, we derived those dimensions. Then we found a partial overlap with existing domains. So from other frameworks I mentioned earlier, for example, confidence, control, commitment, and challenge from the previous framework I mentioned from the 4 Cs model. However, our domains bring out quite a unique aspect of mental toughness, and it narrows down a more defined explanation of mental toughness, which also is related to resilience, but it's more targeted and more tailored to what we're actually looking for, and when we're speaking of mental toughness, and especially in sports people. Then we identified because there's a lack of explanation, and there are so many explanations and definitions out there about mental toughness, we want to develop a new instrument how to measure mental toughness, because there are also a few out there, but they don't measure mental toughness accurately. So now that we identified those new domains, we can also define a new instrument that captures mental toughness more accurately, and new domains that are probably more accurate as well, that identify mental toughness maybe a bit more explicitly. What we then want to achieve with that was an enhanced measurement, addressing the gaps I mentioned earlier of resilience, mental toughness, and everything that's out there. Having a refined assessment, and then having practical applications as well with a new instrument. On the left-hand side, you can see an example of a current standing mental toughness measure. That's the MTQ 48. Maybe some of you have heard of that before. I think it's pretty well represented when someone is looking it up on Google. However, there are a lot of gaps in that one as well, which I'm coming to in a few minutes. But just in comparison, you can see how they differ. So on the right-hand side, that's the new instrument, and like just a little example of what it looks like, or what the content is. And we call it the Dorling Mental Toughness Scale. And in just shortened, it's DMTQ 30. So it is 30 questions, and that's those questions, or those items we are assessing, they measure all those domains. Again, on the left-hand side, the MTQ 48, and then on the right-hand side, a little extract of the new developed instrument. So it's more like also a rating scale, which probably makes it a bit easier for people to assess and to rate themselves on there. So it's a self-reporting instrument like the other one. However, it's probably a bit easier to access. Yeah, and with that one, we want to contribute to research that we offer a refined assessment and addressing the gaps that are out there. And we want to accurately assess mental toughness. There are the practical applications I mentioned before. What we want to look at in more detail in the future is how it enhances stress management, for example, how we can improve or implement new strategies for stress management, helping individuals to cope with pressure effectively, especially in sport settings and competition settings, or in organizational settings, wherever there's a lot of stress and pressure. And in preparation, for example, for athletes for a competition. I was actually working with an athlete, and he had a very big competition coming up, and he didn't compete for 2 years, and he's a professional athlete. So I worked with him a little bit, and I gave him some practical applications, did some tests with him and iterations of those tests as well. And since we had those, I think it was 6 months of work, and since then he didn't lose any competition, which is obviously also a great win for him, but also speaks for all the work we have done or the work we put in, and yeah, it just proves a practical application, I think. Yeah, so it's applicable in both sports and organizational environments. And with the new mental toughness instrument, we hope to enhance performance overall and performance outcomes in particular by providing a more structural approach to mental toughness. And yeah, I think I touched on that one as well. And on this, perfect. So that was the first presentation I wanted to show you. I now want to go to the next part, which is more the development of the actual instrument and more a practical approach to it. But I want to stop quickly here if there are any questions or any comments or anything. I'm conscious that our research is also very, very theoretical and very data-based and analytical, but I'm trying to show you or name you a few examples as well to make it a bit more practical, hopefully. If you have any comments or any questions, feel free to pop that in the chat maybe. I'm not sure if I can see that actually, but I just wait a few seconds. Okay, then I will continue with my next presentation. Okay, I hope you can see it on my screen. I have two screens open, so whenever I look on the right-hand side, then that's probably me looking at my big screen because I have to flip now between different screens.
We can see it okay.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, so I think this is more the exciting part, at least for me, because that's now more the development of the actual mental toughness questionnaire. A quick overview of the study. So the objective was the development and also validation of a new psychometric tool to measure mental toughness, and that was all across high performance environments. It builds on the prior research. It extends the mental toughness assessments also beyond sports into broader high pressure domains. However, it still focuses a lot on sports. So at the moment, the majority we assessed were athletes, and there are more coming. So the research is still undergoing. We at the moment recruiting more athletes, especially professional athletes, and we are talking to coaches. They now luckily want to support us. They have also some Olympians in their teams who will contribute to this research, and yeah, we are really looking forward to it. We had methodology, just quickly, we had an expert panel review for content validity refinement. Then we had a pre-test on a small target sample, and then we had an exploratory factor analysis, which was again in a statistics system with at the moment 92 participants, and that's still underway. So we will have a couple of hundred more, I assume. With that methodology, we then had some refinements to the current instrument. and some modifications just to ensure compatibility and psychometric robustness. And we want to, so the goal of this whole instrument is then having it as a normal, like, for example, personality test you do, and having that as a measure you can go to, you can access online, for example, to measure your own mental toughness for free and to get your results at the end as well. I know I touched on that before, but now it relates a bit more to positive psychology and how this actually came up with the instrument and what we are looking at now. So overall, as I said before, the explanation of mental toughness or the definition is a bit fragmented. However, we define it as a psychological construct that embodies resilience, focus, and determination in the face of challenges. It has connections with other constructs. So, for example, hardiness, grit, resilience, and coping strategies. They contribute to overcoming difficulties and highlight a common ground in understanding human behavior. So that's my very passion, to understand human behavior and how can we make a lot of things better that are not working, and how can we leverage from positive psychology in particular to make things better. It has the foundations in positive psychology. It focuses on strength, virtues, and factors that contribute to human flourishing. And mental toughness showcases, for example, how an individual can rise, how an individual can score high on well-being and performance, and it illustrates its relevant in diverse contexts. The DMTQ-30 was developed as a reliable tool to measure mental toughness, and it's providing a little bit of more insights than other tools into individuals' mental resilience, where you're standing on your mental performance, for example. And that then helps to inform training, development programs, interventions, and more strategies how to get mentally stronger. There are research implications as well. For example, in the area of sports, education, mental health sectors, and also organizational-wide in organizations with high mental pressure. We also want to look at providing some guidance, maybe not advice, but more like guidance and techniques to coaches to understand techniques, to give them a bit more techniques, some educational practices, some approaches to foster stronger individuals and communities. I think I touched on understanding mental toughness versus resilience earlier, and positive psychology as well. So a quick recap on psychological constructs on mental toughness, with mental toughness or related to mental toughness. I just wanted to touch on the third point here, the importance of resilience and grit. Mental toughness obviously shares a common ground. However, it is related. However, mental toughness extends much more beyond those two. It incorporates additional psychological, cognitive, and behavioral dimensions that can significantly improve performance under pressure in individuals, and to the broader organization, it's applicable as well. It also has a huge role in performance enhancement, which we saw in athletes previously, which we saw in a team environment, which we saw in an individual sports environment. in various fields, but especially in the sports area, we found that by fostering mental toughness, individuals can improve not only their focus, but it improves their motivation, their stress management, emotional regulation. It overall leads to better outcomes and to more successes in their sporting journey, for example. Quickly want to touch on what other measurements are out there or other measurement tools. So I explained earlier what the MTQ-48 is, the mental toughness questionnaire. That's probably the most common one or most common used even. There's the sports mental toughness questionnaire as well. However, that's a bit more, I would say, smaller and not really targeted on the actual aspects of mental toughness. So that has a lot of gaps as well. And then there's the mental toughness index, which is also not covering all the domains or the items we found previously in our study to integrate. They have also faced a lot of critiques in research, and they have just a lot of limited applicability across especially diverse performance settings. So they're focused on one area in particular, and there it works, but not for broader application. And our instrument at the moment does that. Yeah, I think I touched on the other points as well. And yeah, just skip that one a little bit. Touch on that one. And yeah, so there's an urgency for a more nuanced approach. The current set of research also says there's an urgent need for a better understanding of mental toughness, especially recently over the last few years with the pandemic, with everything since COVID. Mental toughness or in general mental health was pretty much in the spotlight. And since then, my research in particular really picked up and got a lot of international focus, let's put it that way, because it's such an important topic. And that's why we want to contribute to research to develop a more comprehensive framework that incorporates a more diverse perspective and has a practical approach to it as well, and how it could potentially enhance the validity of other measurements or our measurement overall, and then ultimately provide practitioners with a more just a practical approach to foster mental resilience for example, if they're a coach for their athletes or in organizations for their employees. Where the mental toughness questionnaire can be applied to is what I touched on before, in sports in particular, then in academia, in business. We are at the moment also looking at military operations. Because we are focusing on sports and this series is more in the sports area, I just want to focus on that one here. So for athletes, it's the necessity to perform under pressure. It can help coaches and athletes to identify areas for improvement. Then again, not neglecting the mental aspect of athletic performance, but also focusing on mind and body and that connection, and then improve those areas where they might have gaps with targeted interventions, and then that hopefully leads to enhanced performance and competitive advantage. And we saw that, for example, in athletes like Simone Biles, I think, the Olympian who really went out there and said her mental health is not great, and she focused on enhancing her mental toughness, and she really did a really great work promoting that topic, and had a lot of help from mental coaches as well. And she overcame her adversities and yeah, got a lot of successes in the past. A quick methodological approach to the development of the measure. We used a modified Delphi method. I'm just skipping a few things because I touched on them before. So we had an expert panel that we utilized to identify the key components in the development process. We used an iterative technique to engage those experts that then helped us to form a consensus on the questionnaire to enhance the content and to prove validity. We identified 6 core dimensions of mental toughness, which I showed you a bit earlier on the scale. So just to recap, that was discipline, motivation, perseverance, self-belief, and tenacity, and leadership. And what we then did is presented them to the panel, received expert feedback, then refined the items in there, and with that ensured content validity. So that was study 3A. We did the theoretical suitability. The expert panel consisted of 8 professionals. They had extensive knowledge and experience in mental toughness. For example, they had they were carefully selected, had a background in, for example, psychology, were competitive coaching people, were athletes themselves, or contributed to resilience research. So we had a well-rounded forum to explore mental toughness from multiple perspectives, and that enriched our whole discussion and the instrument itself. The primary focus of the panel was just on mental toughness, and to focus on the success in high-pressure environments. And then with their unique perspective and experience, that contributed to a more comprehensive understanding of what mental toughness means and what it constitutes and how it can be cultivated. We then gathered the feedback. So that's really small on the left-hand side here. I just put up a few examples of the feedback, what it was. So, for example, we clarified the questions for a better understanding. This is just the action we have taken. I just put in a few examples. So that's how it is in the whole research study on the right-hand side. Themes topic identified by expert panel. So that's all in my thesis written up, and I really tried to narrow it down for this presentation to make it a little bit more practical. But yeah, that's what we did on the right-hand side, and then put it in the table and addressed everything the feedback was and what they provided. Then we enhanced the items, so made sure they were more clear, they had a better meaning, improved the items overall in terms of the wording and just the purpose and the functionality. Increased the relevance as well, so that it's relevant to the questionnaire and that it's relevant to mental toughness, and then also for its intended audience, and align the whole content to the current needs and the context, and also align it to a real world scenario. What great feedback was as well to integrate a reversed items section for each of the domains. So we didn't just want to put in items that people could agree on, but also reverse items. For example, at the bottom, you can see here on the slide, I remain composed under pressure. So the reverse item would be I struggle to maintain composure in high pressure situations. So they were like kind of test questions, and then the audience could score on both of them, and then it gave a better result and a more accurate result. We then did a pre-test of the items or of the questionnaire itself with a target population. We had, from memory, it was 5 people we tested it with. It was kind of like a preliminary assessment. Then we could identify any issues or ambiguities in the questionnaire prior to its whole broader application with the actual target audience. And then we wanted to ensure that the final tool is valid and reliable. Yeah, then we've refined it a little bit more as well. It all went through the ethics approval, and then we could finally release it. Yeah, that's more like the demographics and stuff for the pre-test. Yeah, and then we just had the robustness of the questionnaire confirmed, structural clarity, and they agreed on suitability, and then it was basically ready for rollout. Yeah, so that's on the very right-hand side, point 5. Once we had all those tests done, it was ready for full test scaling. And that was the more practical part. And that's study 3. So we are currently sitting at 92 people. We are assessing athletes, corporate professionals, and emergency responders. We had a quite targeted outreach through posts on social media, through professional networks, institutional partnerships. But as I previously mentioned, we are also currently talking to a few sports teams, quite high-level sports teams, and some Olympians and some coaches who will participate in this research. And yeah, that's those are a few teams, so I would assume there are a few hundred people who will participate, and that's all across Australia. Perfect. So yeah, just some ethical research methodologies, probably not really interesting here. That's more the interesting part. I think on the right-hand side, you can see the questionnaire. So it's a link online on Google Forms. We published that quite like in a form that it's quite easily accessible, that's quite straightforward. It has the whole participant consent at the start, but it's very simplified questions, and then the actual questionnaire is the big screenshot on the right-hand side. The first one, which I showed us a quick extract of it earlier as well, and people can just rate some statements from 1 to 5. So first question is, for example, I often question my abilities, and then they just rate it from 1 to 5. And they don't see a score right away when they fill it in. However, in the background, we can basically see their scores, but we can see the score more on a team level. So for example, if a sports team is doing this test, then we can see in the background what they filled in. They filled in a particular team, and then we can assess the mental toughness on a team level, for example, which is really interesting for coaches. And then they can identify, is my team actually ready for the next match? Or do we really struggle mentally here? Because the performance is good, but it could be better. And with that kind of tool, they could, for example, identify some mental issues in there and can then apply some targeted interventions and then can improve the mental toughness component in there, just as a practical example. It's very technical on the next few slides, so I might skip some of them. Just on a high level, we did reliability, validity, and consistency analysis. Did the structural validity instrument structure, did all the statistical methods and analysis, did the definition of content validity, did all the statistics around there. This is just an explanation how it actually works. If you're not really in the statistics space, I think it doesn't really make sense explaining this and what the results were, but it was all reliable. The 6 dimensions we identified previously were confirmed with a factor analysis of the psychometric properties. So it's all statistically ticked off, basically. It's all statistically proven. Proper research has been conducted and it's all confirmed. Our pre-identified domains were confirmed, basically. It all had the consistency in there, and we validated this 6-factor structure as well. And just some numbers on the right-hand side. It has an explained variance of 62.43%. It's above psychometric thresholds, which is great. The factor loadings had strong alignment with theoretical constructs. At the bottom, you can see a few numbers, just statistical validation, and on the left-hand side, the 6 factors were confirmed. That's just a bit of explanation on that one. So yeah, those are the factor loadings in how they look like practically, I guess. They provided the statistical confirmation of how each item aligns with the 6-factor model. So there's a little bit of an extract on the right-hand side. And this is probably also a really interesting part, how it integrates with psychological capital, which I alluded to at the beginning, which is the very great construct we want to we want to integrate mental toughness into. So what we found is that hope and motivation are related to mental toughness, and hope is a driver of motivation, which is in the context of mental toughness, that hope plays a crucial role in maintaining focus and perseverance during challenges. We found that efficacy enhances confidence. It directly influences mental toughness. It empowers individuals to tackle obstacles and perform under pressure, and it fosters a resilient mindset. Resilience, again, contributes to overcoming adversity. Optimism relates to a positive outlook. In mental toughness area, it helps individuals to maintain a positive outlook even in challenging situations. That then again leads to better coping strategies and enhanced performance. And the whole interconnectedness of mental toughness and PsyCAP is that it has an emphasis of perseverance, self-belief, and adaptability under pressure. That's why mental toughness closely aligns with PsyCAP, because it reinforces the importance of developing both constructs to optimize performance and resilience in high-demand environments. So they're both focusing on those high-performing environments. They share a very common ground. They contribute to an individual's psychological resilience, but also a collective psychological resilience, as I mentioned before, more of the team aspect. And the studies, again, on organizational behavior, they contribute to both as well. So we see them as interconnected. However, it came out of those studies that mental toughness is more a moderator of psychological capital, and we want to integrate it into kind of like a fifth domain of psychological capital with its own mental toughness domains. Then I'm already coming towards the end. A few theoretical and practical implications of the measurement. We are currently also developing kind of you can call it a training structure for a coach and for his particular team, how this would help to enhance performance within the team and their mental toughness, their collective mental toughness, but also on an individual level. We want to look at how they score on their mental toughness and how that can contribute to their performance within this season. We want to create personalized strategies and interventions to address their weaknesses, for example, to leverage strengths and contribute to their overall performance, and really want to identify what individual needs are. And just recently developed a plan with interventions, but we want to look at the results first and then adopt strategies to address those needs and those challenges they have. But it's a very practical approach, a very sensitive approach as well. So it's really tailored to individual needs, but focusing on the broader picture of team performance. Just a few limitations we found. I want to touch on that as well, because that's good housekeeping for a researcher. We are still doing some research. We still need more participants overall. That's why it's a bit limited at the moment. The sample size is not as big as we want it to be right now, but hopefully it will be. It's currently Australia-based. We don't have ethical approval to do it outside of Australia, but that's for now, and hopefully in the future that will be different. And yeah, but that will be improved hopefully as well, and demographic groups overall as well, hopefully too. Then the application we want to be published obviously and to be broader, which is at the moment also not the case, but hopefully that will be in the future as well. And then longer studies are highly recommended to be done as well, probably for a few more years, iterative as well, maybe even to follow a team or some athletes around and to measure their mental toughness over a couple of seasons or even longer. And just a few application areas: sports psychology, corporate leadership, emergency services, education. Those are just a few examples where the tool can be applied to. And that is already the end of this presentation. Thank you very much for listening to this probably very theoretical approach to mental toughness, but I hope I could share with you a bit of the amazing work we're doing, and we're really hoping to contribute to a bigger purpose to get out there, measure mental toughness more accurately in sports, in particular in individuals, and help them how to improve their mental toughness and give them more a practical handbook or guidance how to do that, because at the moment it's just not really the case. And I think the problem is that a lot of people don't know where to start, or they don't know really what to do, and it's just a good starting point overall. And we want to help them a little bit to kick off and do a test and see where the gaps are. And if they're really serious athletes and really serious about what they do, they will find a way how to improve it. But sometimes they just need a tool how to start. And we think that's a really important and very impactful tool to do that.
Great. Thank you very much, Jennifer. That's a really interesting talk. The thing that I like about doing this is it exposes me to people, researchers in lots of different areas, and the group here today isn't just drawn from economics. There's mathematicians and statisticians and people from all sorts of different fields. So that's a really interesting talk. Thank you very much. I'm going to give you a Teams round of applause for it. We've got a little bit of time. We've got about 15 minutes for Q&A. So if anybody does have any questions on Jennifer's talk today, please do raise your hand and ask your question. Well, in the absence of a question from the audience, I will ask one. I was quite interested in obviously what you're trying to do here, and I guess use this metric to help I guess develop mental toughness in athletes and in other areas. And I guess I wondered, what is it? I mean, is it ever possible to get a sense of how effective such a tool is? You know, is there any kind of measurement? Can you identify people? Can you use the responses to measure how mentally tough a set of respondents are to the questionnaire that you set up? Because obviously I know you you mentioned you've done it in Google Forms, so you can collect lots of this data presumably. But even if you did, you'd need some other kind of. It isn't that you could then say, athlete over there, he is definitely mentally tough, and she's definitely not quite mentally tough, and that one is the least mentally tough of them all. It's quite hard, I guess, to evaluate how effective such a tool would be. Is that right?
Exactly. That's what we are working on at the moment as well. So once we have enough results, what we want to do is providing those results first on a more group level. So let's say there's a team, they do that test, and then we can assess them on a team level. However, what we want to do, or what we want to achieve in the future, to publish this, like put it online, for example, so people can do it just like a normal personality test, for example, and then have their scores immediately. And then they can see where they score high or low on which dimensions, because there are 30 questions in there. So 6 domains, 5 questions each. And then they can see straight away, well, like I'm not scoring high on motivation, for example, or I'm not scoring high on discipline. And once they have the results, the next step would be then to have those targeted interventions in place. What we are at the moment developing for this one coach with his team. They're a very high-level team as well, very competitive, very successful. So what the coach is looking for, what can we do? What is a training plan for my team, but on a psychological level? How can I help them to improve how to believe in themselves? How can we see where gaps are, because they have different issues going on? So how can we make them mentally stronger? So that's what we are looking at the moment as well. And with that test, that's the kind of prerequisite. And eventually we want to have all those scores in place. But because it's still kind of under development, it's the ongoing research, we can't really give scores at the moment, or like results at the moment. We can look at them in the background, but not, we can't just provide them to individuals, for example, because we don't have ethical approval for that, unfortunately. Yeah, but on a team level and more anonymously, without telling the coach or the team leader or whoever what the individuals scored on, that's definitely what we can do.
I mean, I think the idea of doing it on a repeated basis with individuals is really interesting, or with teams, of course, it's really interesting, because I'd have thought mental toughness isn't just a mean effect. So I mean, I guess if they answer all the questions and you give them a score out of 30, I guess, or 48, it's also a bit of there's a variance effect, right? Because you want someone to be mentally tough every week, so you want the score to be high and very minimal variance, right? You want to always be scoring high. You don't want someone who one week is mentally tough and then the next week they're not mentally tough.
Yeah.
And so it's a kind of a mean and a variance type effect that's of interest when it comes to mental toughness, I would have thought.
Absolutely. And there are a lot of external factors. So if something happens, someone's going through a breakup, or something happened in their family, for example, then that decreases some of the domains of mental toughness as well. But then that's when the test comes in and it measures that. And it can then already, like before something bad happens, for example, somebody can, like, for example, a coach can just be like, we do that test monthly or every 2 weeks or something, and let's see where we can improve. And then at one point they have all the tools available and they know exactly what to do. They're going through a rough phase, for example, but they have the tool in place. like as in interventions, like I know exactly what I need to do to not break, for example. So I have a training plan in place. I stay mentally strong. I can cope with this competition. This is my lead up to the season. They have a really important match coming up, and they don't have those breaking points.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the different dimensions of the mental toughness is really interesting, from a coming at this from an economic perspective or from a sports fan perspective relative to the more psychological perspective.
It might also has a bit of a predictive component to it as well. So like a coach can look at someone and can, like when they score low on some domains, they can already identify some of the issues and then can already do something about it before it's too late or before something happens, or like there's a match coming up and somebody's performing badly, but they can already jump in before.
Yeah, I mean, it's not just the coach either, right? If you're playing in a sport where you've got thousands of spectators watching you,
Yeah.
if it's a team sport with the team's fans, you've got thousands of people that are telling you exactly what your mental toughness looks like on a regular basis. So, I mean, I would have thought, this, a tool like this could be really effective in that kind of setting.
Definitely.
Still got a couple of minutes left. Any more questions and comments from the audience? Well, given it's getting very late for you there, Jennifer, I think we'll allow you to rest for the day. Thank you so much for staying up so very late there and giving us a really interesting and insightful talk on mental toughness in sports people. We will be back again next week. Next week we've got Dave Berry. And Dave Berry is going to be presenting Exploring the Gender Wage Gap in a World of Exogenous Revenues, the Case of Professional Basketball. So do join us next week, February 7th, for our next Reading Online Sports Economics Seminar. In the meantime, don't forget that math sport abstract deadline if you're thinking about that conference. And otherwise, have a great weekend and see you all next week. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jennifer.